There you go. And everybody's got it. Good deal. So has anybody, raise your hand if you've not been to one of these meetings before? Oh, okay, great. Well, welcome. No, I thought you had for some reason. Okay, well, that's fine. My name is Carol Hunter, and I am on the board of directors for CPUN, Central Park United Neighbors. And I'm co-chair along with Amy of the Safe Streets Committee. I'm also co-chair of the Education Committee. And Central Park United Neighbors is an RNO, a registered neighborhood organization. So stay with me here because we have these acronyms. So that's the next layer. And then RNOs, there's about roughly 200 of them in Denver. And they are part, and there's an umbrella organization called Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation. And those folks have a board of directors. They have an agenda. They meet once a month. They meet on the second Saturday of the month from 9 to 11 in the morning. And they have all kinds of things on their agenda and they make all sorts of decisions, but it's this collaborative effort of taking RNOs like CPUN, and we have common issues. And Lord knows, Jill knows that, and Lord knows that we share a lot of the issues around safe streets and all the things that come with that. So, and the INC, Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation, has a transportation committee as well. And they meet, well, their next meeting is the 11th of May, but they meet once a month. And a gentleman named Joel Noble is a very competent person, runs a good meeting, and he is the chair of that committee. I want you to know that I usually attend the meetings on Saturdays, and they have started now at the very end of the meeting to ask people if they have a comment about some issue. And so the last meeting I attended was in March, and I made a comment about safe streets. We renamed this group Safe Streets. It used to be called the Transportation Committee, and we changed it a few years ago to Safe Streets. But I did bring up just the egregious kind of driving that's going on, the frustrations that we feel, the kinds of mitigation we want to get that seems to be just impossible to get. And we just, so I just mentioned that, and the fact that I'm sure we share that with other neighborhoods, and that we are, you know, one of the things we're really concerned about is we want our kids to walk and bike and roll to school and around the neighborhood. My office, I'm looking right out on Uinta Street, which is like a freeway, although it's a 2-lane street from 49th to 56th. And I watched 3 kids with squirt guns this morning, or no, yesterday, because yesterday they were still out of school. And I want them on the street, but I want them to be safe on the street. So that's just one consideration. And but now they're taking kind of open comments. So people, my point is, people are sharing their frustrations, maybe some of their victories, the issues that they have. And I like more of that kind of, let's know one another's business, so we can just all get smarter together. So that's just a little bit about CPUN. And one other thing I want to mention, in May, we're doing a shift as our calendar year for Central Park United Neighbors, and we have openings for board members. So if you are thinking about that, if you are, or just want to know what that means, or you know some people that might be good problem solvers, people who like to get in and, I don't know, express their opinions and talk with their community members, please let me know, and I can put my email in the chat for you. But that is in May. We're going to have this shift. So, and welcome to the next person who just joined us. Thank you so much. So Amy, I'm going to turn it to you because you were so diligent about securing our speaker today, and go right ahead.
Awesome. Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us for our April meeting. In the interest of making sure we have enough time for all the discussion we might want to have, I'll just turn the floor over to Jill Locantore. She's the Executive Director of Denver Streets Partnership, which maybe she'll introduce a little bit to us. So Jill, thanks for being here. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, and thank you so much for your patience. I know you originally reached out to invite the Denver Streets Partnership to come speak with you all, I think back in October of last year. And our schedules were just pretty bonkers last year with the sidewalk campaign that you may have heard about. And we had to put a lot of things on hold because of that. And then once the campaign was over, we kind of had to recollect ourselves and figure out what our purpose in life is going forward now that we've finished with that campaign. So we've been doing some pretty intensive strategic planning over the last couple of months. So thank you again for your patience. Some of the stuff I'm going to share with you is actually hot off the presses from our new strategic plan. Can you give me the ability to share my screen? Because I have put together a PowerPoint for you all.
Yes, I think if I make you a co-host, you should be able to do that. 1 second.
Yeah, you
sorry.
should.
And it sounded like we had plenty of time. So I have a lot of content in the presentation, but you should definitely feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have questions. We can definitely make this a dialogue.
Great.
Awesome. And you should be able to, yeah, okay, cool.
All right, we're off and running. So for those of you who maybe are not familiar with the Denver Streets Partnership, we're a coalition of community-based organizations who are advocating for people-friendly streets. We have about 6 full-time staff members that work for the Denver Streets Partnership, but our policy positions and our advocacy is informed by a coalition of about 24 different groups at this point. On the slide, you can see some of the members of our steering committee that are interested in transportation issues for a variety of reasons, whether it's health considerations, equity considerations, environmental considerations. And so they really help us think holistically about our transportation and how it intersects with all the different aspects of our quality of life. This is our recently updated vision and mission. Our mission is to advocate for cultural and systemic changes that will reduce our dependence on driving and instead prioritize people. We really believe that human dignity should be the guiding principle in the design of our transportation system and our neighborhoods so that everybody can thrive and connect to the daily destinations they need to get to. Equity is also a really important consideration that's threaded throughout our work. We think about it in a few different ways. One, from the systemic level, we know that transportation policy decisions have been part of creating systemic inequities in our city, and to create a more equitable society where everybody has access to opportunities like employment and education and criminal justice, that transportation needs to be part of those solutions. We also work really hard to make sure that our staff and our coalition members and the community members that are engaged in our work really represent the diversity of communities in our city and the different lived experiences that people have. And we also are cognizant about distribution of power and resources and making sure that we are helping bring resources directly to the communities that need it the most in order to advocate for their own needs around transportation. These are the top priorities that guide our policy advocacy work. We're looking to increase funding and establish policies that create better access to walking and biking and rolling and transit. And conversely, we want to get rid of all the policies that have been in place for many decades that really have created our unhealthy dependency on driving and forced people to drive, whether they really want to or not. So that we can create quality, people-oriented streets that are really supporting the communities and the people that live on those streets. So that the majority of trips don't have to be by driving, that other ways of getting around are practical and convenient, and that people are not dying or being seriously injured when they're using our transportation system. We do focus primarily on citywide and even regional and statewide policies to achieve these outcomes. But when we're doing neighborhood specific work or working along specific corridors, we prioritize both in terms of the high injury network. This is the 5% of the streets where 50% of the traffic fatalities are happening. So clearly, to get to zero traffic fatalities, we need to focus on these most dangerous streets. And also equity index areas shown in blue on the map. We often talk about this in Denver as the inverted L, areas to the west and to the north that historically have been underinvested in, have been victims of redlining, and face more barriers to healthy living than other parts of the city. So some of our successes over the years have included very high level policies like the prioritization of pedestrians in our transportation system. You may have seen this pyramid diagram that was first adopted in Blueprint Denver, the overarching land use and transportation plan for the city, that clearly states that people walking should be the top priority in our transportation system, followed by other space efficient and safe modes like biking and taking transit, followed by access for goods and services so that we can all get the products that we need on a daily basis, with driving being at the bottom of the pyramid. In some sense, this is just symbolic, but this is a statement of the city's values that we can hold them accountable to. Another example is we helped bring about the city's commitment to Vision Zero. We might take it for granted now, but for a long time, there was not agreement that zero traffic fatalities was the goal that we should be working towards, that maybe it was okay for some people to be dying on our streets as long as that meant we could get around in our cars easily. But in 2017, Mayor Hancock officially established the goal of zero traffic fatalities with the target date of 2030. The city developed an action plan with nearly 70 action items, including, most importantly, the theme of building streets that are safe in the first place. So we don't have to be using education or enforcement when people are driving unsafely. And making sure that we have money to actually implement all of these plans that the city is developing. When we first started advocating as the Denver Streets Partnership, the city was spending less than $5 million per year on sidewalks and bike lane infrastructure in the city. And thanks to our advocacy, that has gradually been growing over time. You can see after the city adopted Vision Zero, we started spending money specifically on safe streets improvement. After the city adopted the Denver Moves Transit plan, the city started investing more directly in transit, not just relying on RTD to do that. And then in 2022, the city adjusted parking meter revenue rates and dedicated the new funding that generated specifically for transportation. So it doesn't go into the general fund. It is set aside for things like sidewalks and bike lanes and transit improvements. Similarly, we've advocated for bond funding, which are one-time investments in bigger projects, both in 2017 and 2021, getting a pretty substantial jump start on building out bike lanes, sidewalks, and transit, with some additional funding for Vision Zero in 2021. And updating the city's complete street design guidelines. So when the city's actually building or changing, retrofitting streets, they are designing them to be complete streets that think of not just people driving, but also how do we safely accommodate people walking and riding bikes and waiting for the buses and making sure that those streets are truly safe for everybody. And then actually seeing on the ground change. This is probably, the hardest part. You get all these policies in place and it still takes years before you start to see these changes in the real world, but they are happening slowly but surely. These are some pictures of, let me see, this would be 18th Street in downtown Denver, which I think is one of the better examples of a truly complete street these days. It has a nice wide sidewalk. It has a dedicated protected space for bicyclists. It has dedicated bus-only transit lanes. It has these nice big islands separating the bicyclists from the bus lane and giving a good safe place for people waiting for the bus. We're starting to see more and more of this type of example of complete streets being built throughout Denver. You may have also heard about our 20 is Plenty campaign. At the end of 2021, City Council passed an ordinance reducing the default speed limit from 25 miles an hour to 20 miles per hour. This applies on local streets where there is no posted speed limit. So if you don't see anything posted, you should know the default is 20 miles per hour. But the city is also going to be installing, starting this month, I think in April, it was the latest they told me, a bunch of new speed limit signs around the city at these gateway locations, both when people first enter the city overall, and then when they enter neighborhoods where the default speed limit primarily applies, alerting everybody that 20 miles per hour is that speed limit.
So that's the case, Jill, that's the case now. It is 20?
It is the law right now. The city, the city's slow. So they haven't installed any new speed limit signs, but like I said, they should be starting to do that this month, but it is the law. So if you are on a street that does not have a posted speed limit sign, the speed limit on those streets is 20 miles per hour.
That's good to know, and we can start to market that, advertise it, because I moved here in 2017 and into Central Park, and one of the first things I noticed was there were no speed limit signs, except around schools. But just biking and walking, that was something that just was glaring. So thank you for that, updating that information. Appreciate it.
Sure, and there should be more information coming about that soon from the city. And then the city is also studying speed limit reductions on streets where the speed limit is posted. And there's already a few where they've started reducing them, like Evans Avenue. They reduced from 40 miles per hour to 35 miles per hour. We also had some successes this past year in putting a halt to the city's and the state's plans to widen I-25 through central Denver. And instead refocus funding in the statewide plan towards transit, which will help people get around much more safely and efficiently without creating pollution through central Denver. And of course, our Denver Deserves Sidewalks campaign has now removed the responsibility that you all had as homeowners for building and repairing the sidewalk in front of your home. That is now entirely the responsibility of the city. There is dedicated funding for that through a property fee that will enable the build out of sidewalks everywhere that they're missing in the city, widening of any sidewalks that don't meet ADA standards, as well as ongoing funding for repairs of sidewalks in perpetuity so that we can always maintain sidewalks in a good state of repair. And then, as I mentioned, we do also do some work in specific neighborhoods or corridors where we're lifting up the community's vision and supporting their own ideas for how to make their streets more people-friendly, whether that's intersection murals, murals on buildings, wayfinding on the pavement, or one of them more prominent examples from last year you might have heard about was working with the community in Sun Valley to activate the space underneath the Colfax Viaduct, which normally is just a parking lot. But the community is interested in turning that space into an international marketplace. And so we did that twice last year, and we'll be doing it again this year on May 14th. But a lot of times what we hear from communities in specific neighborhoods is concerns about speeding and unsafe driver behavior in their neighborhoods. And you're concerned about speeding for good reason, because we know that speed is the #1 factor that contributes to whether a crash happens in the first place and whether that crash results in a serious injury or fatality. If a car is going just 20 miles per hour, there's a very good chance that if a person gets hit, they will walk away uninjured from that interaction with the car. But if the car is going 40 miles per hour, the most likely outcome is the person will be seriously injured or killed. And we know that traffic deaths, despite our commitment to Vision Zero, are continuing to go up here in Denver, outpacing even population growth. In 2021, we hit a new high of 84 people who were killed just trying to get around our streets. And we know that people outside of cars are most likely the victims of these traffic crashes. And in fact, people walking are 30 times more likely to die in a crash compared to people in cars. And it's also disproportionately impacting specific racial groups. This is actually national data. It's harder to get this data more locally, but across the country, we're seeing in particular Black and Native American populations are disproportionately the victims of fatal crashes. We know that older adults are much more likely to die in traffic crashes. We know that people in lower income neighborhoods are more likely to die. In lower income neighborhoods, fewer people can afford to have a car, more people are depending on walking to get to transit and other destinations. But lower income neighborhoods often have the worst sidewalks and other pedestrian conditions. And aside from just the basics of safety, not being killed is the least that we can ask of our transportation system, but it's also about the livability of our streets. When traffic is going slower, that's when people feel comfortable letting their kids play in the front yard or even in the street itself. That's when it's comfortable to be gardening in your front yard or just hanging out with your neighbors in that space. So in terms of what actually can reduce speed on our city streets, speed limits do matter to a certain extent. This is a case study from Seattle, where similar to Denver, they reduced their default speed limit, in that case from 30 miles an hour to 25 miles per hour. And then, like Denver's about to do, they just modified signage throughout the city. And they did, in fact, see a significant decrease in the number of crashes, and particularly serious injury crashes, and the number of drivers that were going particularly fast over the speed limit. But really, the most important thing for how fast people drive is the design of the street. What is it inviting people to do? Is it reinforcing going fast, like a race car driver, or is it reinforcing going slowly? One of the most obvious examples you probably are all familiar with how street design can reinforce those speeds is speed humps, where you have to go up and over something as you're going down the street. These previously were not allowed in Denver until we got the updated complete street design guidelines. And now the city is just starting to pilot them in a few neighborhoods. But the more they hear from people like you that you want it in your neighborhood too, the faster they're going to start rolling these out. And they can be mid-block, like in the picture here. They can also be at crosswalks. I particularly like this idea where instead of pedestrians having to go down into the street to cross it, drivers have to go up and over the crosswalk, really clearly communicating that that space is prioritized for pedestrians. You can also have entire intersections that are raised. If you're ever down in the town of Lone Tree, they actually have a raised intersection down there that you can check out. And then there's also what we call more horizontal traffic calming, which is basically adding pinch points, curb extensions, or chicanes is the term for changes to the street that force drivers through a bottleneck or force them to take a curvy path as they're going down the street. So on the bottom here, you can see an example on 11th Avenue where they've used bump outs at the corner that narrows down the street just psychologically. It causes the driver to slow down, and it also shortens that crossing distance for pedestrians getting from one side to the other. You can also literally add diverters at intersections that prevent cars from going more than a few blocks at a time before they have to turn off that route. It doesn't mean cars can't access the street. It just discourages drivers from going many blocks at a time down that street. And so they just don't have the time to build up the speed. This picture on the right is an example on, sorry, my mouse got away from me, in Northwest Denver on Irving, where they have a diverter so that if you're crossing Irving, you can do so as a bike going through the middle of the diverter, but cars can't. Or just adding median refuge islands, providing a place for pedestrians to safely wait halfway across the street. Again, pedestrians are less exposed, and having this big island in the middle of the street slows down the traffic. Mini traffic circles is another good strategy for reducing speeds on city streets. An important consideration here is how big the traffic circle is. Does it really force drivers to slow down, or can they slalom around it pretty quickly? City of Denver is still dialing in exactly what the right size is for those traffic circles to be effective. And then this has less to do with speed, but is another design feature that you can do on neighborhoods that can pretty dramatically improve safety, which is just preventing cars from parking so close to the corner of the intersection. And it's called daylighting because you're allowing drivers to more easily see pedestrians that might be standing on those corners waiting to cross the street. If the cars are parked right up close to that intersection, the driver who's approaching can't see the pedestrians. But if you clear up that space, it's a lot more visible and less likely for there to be a crash. When we're talking about bigger streets, a lot of those streets on the high injury network, like Colfax Avenue, Federal Boulevard, Colorado Boulevard, prioritizing transit on those streets is really key. Because right now they're designed to accommodate huge volumes of traffic. And so you have cross sections like on the top picture here, where you have 5-6 lanes of traffic that people have to cross to get from one side of the street to the other. And having streets that wide just invites people to go as fast as possible. So the key to continuing to move all the people that need to get down that corridor in a much safer way is through dedicated bus lanes, ideally even bus rapid transit that can still carry a lot of people, but reduces the space available for cars, slows the other traffic down, and just makes it safer for everybody. We do really emphasize the importance of street design, and that if you're leaping too fast to police enforcement, what you end up doing is basically punishing people for making do with streets that are dangerous by design. People are using the streets the way the streets have been designed. They've been designed to encourage fast driving and not to accommodate pedestrians. And we can wag our fingers at those people and criticize pedestrians, for example, for not crossing at a designated crossing place, or we can provide more frequent pedestrian crossings. And we can design streets that are what some people call self-enforcing. They reinforce drivers doing what's legally correct, going the speed limit, yielding to pedestrians. And we aren't relying on police to do that for us. And we also partnered with the task force to reimagine policing and public safety to talk about the problems of over-relying on police. This is the most common way that most citizens interact with the police is through traffic stops. And as we all know, this is where they can often escalate into violent encounters between police officers and community members. And so the task force really reemphasized the need to eliminate the need for traffic enforcement by creating a built environment that promotes that safer behavior, and to the extent possible, not relying on officer-initiated enforcement, but looking to other non-police alternatives for promoting safe behavior, such as automated enforcement, which can be less biased. It's just a camera taking a picture of your driver's license. It doesn't necessarily care who's driving the car or the demographics of the person driving the car. And there's lots of good data that automated enforcement is very effective at reducing speeding, reducing crashes, reducing serious injuries and fatalities. And that when we're doing it well, we're focusing on the most dangerous locations. We have plenty of signage and we're using it consistently in a widespread manner. So drivers aren't being caught off guard. People aren't getting excessive numbers of tickets, but they're actually driving more safely because they know if they go over the speed limit, they'll get a ticket. And so instead of doing that, they just drive the speed limit in the first place. But the problem is here in Colorado, current state law makes it very difficult for the city to use speed cameras effectively. They are limited to residential areas, schools, parks, and construction zones, which of course we want those places to be safe, but that leaves out most of the high injury network, the big arterial streets, like a Colfax, like a Colorado Boulevard, where most of the speeding and the traffic fatalities are happening. And current law doesn't allow the speed cameras to be truly automated. There has to be a person present while the speed camera is in use, which means they can't be in place 24/7. So they're less effective because they're less predictable and it doesn't have the long-term impacts on behavior that a truly automated speed camera system can have. But the good news is that the state legislature is actually currently considering changes to state law that would allow speed cameras to be used in the most dangerous locations, would allow them to be fully automated, not have a person present, but also simultaneously strengthening guardrails against the concerns, the legitimate concerns that people raise about due process and equity issues, and making sure that we're using these speed cameras as fairly as possible and not as a gotcha or not as just a cash cow without creating any real safety benefits for the communities. So this is where we come to what you all can do to advocate for safer streets, specifically in your neighborhood. Tell your state representatives to vote yes on that bill so that you can get more effective automated enforcement in your community. Even before that bill passes, you can reach out to the police department and request either automated enforcement in its current form or these speed feedback signs that tell drivers how fast they're going. They're not quite as effective as truly automated enforcement. They don't tend to have the same long-lasting effects, but they can have some short-term effects, and they can also raise awareness of the issues of speeding on your city streets. You can also order yard signs from the Denver Streets Partnership. We did create a new version of our yard sign that makes it clear that this is the new speed limit in Denver, so you don't have to wait for the city to put out their official signs. You can just go to our website and we will deliver you a yard sign for free. Or we have had neighborhood associations that want to, if they're interested in getting a large batch, you can actually purchase, 50 or 100 yard signs from us, and we can deliver that whole batch to you, and then you can distribute them throughout your neighborhood. I always encourage people to look at what is in existing city plans for your neighborhood. There's a bunch of different websites that you can check out, and I'll be sure to share these with Amy too, to look up what bike facilities are planned, what Safe Routes to Schools projects are planned, what sidewalks are currently in the queue to be built or upgraded in your neighborhood. This helps you provide much more informed and specific feedback when you reach out to city leaders about, I know that you have on your plans this specific bike lane, when is it actually going to be built? And can also allow you to sign up for information about those plans so that whenever the city has a public meeting or has a survey related to those plans, you can be sure to be showing up, expressing your opinion. In advocacy, a big part of the battle is just showing up. Who is at those meetings and expressing their opinions? You can also be collecting your own data to be making the case of what the safety problems are in your neighborhood. We actually have these little speed guns that you can borrow from us. This gentleman here is holding us. It looks like a cell phone. So it's discreet. You're not necessarily going to change drivers' behavior by standing out there. They won't know what you're doing. But this is a couple of people that were collecting speed data both before and during a pop-up traffic calming demonstration we did with them. And with the data that they were able to collect, they were able to show that a huge number of people are typically speeding on their city streets. But when we did this traffic calming demonstration, it had the intended effect of slowing drivers down. So we're happy to loan those out to you. We can provide you with the worksheets for collecting the data and provide a little training on how exactly to organize that in your neighborhood.
Jill, will you show the slide that came just before the people with that attend the public meeting? Okay, Vision Zero Safety Project.
Yeah, this is just an example from, this is in a different neighborhood right now, but the city's proposing to make some Vision Zero improvements on Mississippi Avenue. They had some office hours. They have some online forums where people can submit comments. And just again, half the battle is showing up and making your voice heard, because there's often not a lot of people who attend these meetings.
Great, thank you.
Volunteering to be a school crossing guard is another good way to advocate for safety in your neighborhood. Not only, obviously, are you literally on the street helping kids be safe on their way to school, but this is a great way to observe what are the safety challenges that are happening and to make connections with the families and kids who are struggling with these challenges, who can become your allies, telling stories with that you can put a face and a name to, of a kid who, you know, it doesn't feel safe going to school because of XYZ, and helps you document exactly what are the safety challenges on the streets. You could also start a walking school bus or a bike bus, where you get a group of families and kids who are interested in walking or biking to school, don't necessarily feel safe doing it alone, but as a group, if there's a parent or a teacher or other community member who's willing to lead that. This is a growing movement in the United States. There's this gentleman, Sam Balto in Portland, who's a gym teacher at a local school, and he started up a biking school bus that just started with a few families, and as you can see in the picture, has grown to be this huge event once a week when all the kids bike to school together. And again, this is just demonstrating to your city leaders and to the community at large that there's a huge demand for this, and this is something that the city should be paying attention to. And then once you identify what those safety issues are in your community, either because you've collected the data, you've gotten the stories, you have the members of your community who've observed what's happening, the first step is just reporting it, calling 311 or visiting the Denver government's online services hub where you can submit an issue. This doesn't guarantee at all, I don't want to give you the false impression that the city will actually come out and fix the issue, but they do collect this data and they do monitor over time, you know, are we getting a lot of complaints in a particular area or about a particular issue? And it does increase the likelihood that something will be done in those cases. It's also really great to reach out to your city council person. You know, obviously just sending them an email is low-hanging fruit, but actually invite them to come out and walk in your neighborhood with you and observe what are the challenges that you're dealing with on a regular basis. This is a group of residents who invited Councilman Cashman to walk around in his district and point out how challenging it was to get around without sidewalks when we had parents with kids and strollers and people with disabilities. Having that actual on the street experience can be much more impactful than just sending an email.
And we can get the jump on this because today is election day and we are going to have, we don't know who, a new city councilor. So we can start right away.
Exactly. This is a great way to introduce yourself to your new council members, to invite them to go on a walk with you. And I mentioned earlier, we've done in the past what they call tactical urbanism, you know, very short term, few hours demonstration project using some low cost materials to change the street design and see how drivers react. We used to be able to get permits from the city to do this. They're much harder to get from the city to do it officially, but there are people out there who do this on their own without asking for permission. This is a woman, Nicole, who works as a crossing guard. She observed that drivers were not turning very safely at this intersection, and she just put out some orange cones to try and encourage the drivers to turn more slowly and safely, and then was able to record video that showed the impact of that. And that, again, that helps with the storytelling of what kind of changes on your street would be helpful. Something that you can get permission from the city to do still is art projects focused on the street, in particular intersection murals, and there's even grant funding available from Denver Arts and Venues through PSUR Here is the name of their grant program that allows for these type of art projects. You know, and again, this isn't going to solve your traffic safety problems. This isn't going to mean, you know, everybody's going to stop at the stop sign and slow down, but there is some evidence that art does have some safety impacts. And more importantly, it just elevates the profile of this issue. It draws attention to the intersection. It can support a community conversation. It's a way that you can be reclaiming that space as a community member and expressing your desire that we should be prioritizing people in this space, not just cars.
Do you have any evidence around landscaping, maybe from other cities, as far as I don't know, a mitigating factor. Because I have all kinds of ideas around that. And one of them is to rip up every tree lawn in Central Park and create a beautiful botanical whatever, which I know is never going to happen, but I think it's not that hard. And but I'd like to know about other cities too. So if we have a couple minutes, I don't want to interrupt what you're finishing up here, but I'd like to know more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely evidence that just trees themselves or greenery on the road edge helps reinforce slower speeds. It creates a visual friction. So again, just psychologically, people tend to drive slower. And there's also lots of opportunities at intersections. If you remember the daylighting example from earlier, if you remove the parked cars that are close to the intersection, that actually creates a space that you can reclaim with a little bulb out, and you could potentially put some planters or other artistic elements there, which can help with that traffic calming effect. And if you're really not gaining traction, you can always turn the heat up a notch. You can start a petition or a simple letter writing campaign. Postcards was a tactic we used with the 20 is Plenty campaign, where we had people write postcards to their council members explaining why lower speeds were important to them. This is a petition we helped start for a group of citizens in City Council District 9 who want to see York and Josephine converted from one-way to two-way. Again, there's no guarantee that just because you start this petition that the city's going to react and make changes, but it elevates the priority of the issue. And sometimes it does, in fact, lead to changes. In the Wash Park neighborhood, they had success around the Broadway I-25 interchange and getting more pedestrian safety considerations included into those plans through a petition that they launched. And you can always reach out to the media. You know, the local television stations, they love to do these problem solver stories where they come out and they hear from residents about what are the problems they're having in their community. You can invite the media to come and walk with you and observe and see what's going on. And of course, voting. Who is in office at the mayoral level, at the at-large city council level, at the council level is incredibly important. And where do they stand on all of these issues? We have a candidate questionnaire on the Denver Streets Partnership website where you can read about where each of these candidates stand on issues like transit and Vision Zero and parking management and all of these issues that regularly come up. And then, you know, these are long-term challenges. You know, like I said, none of these are silver bullets that's going to get your problem solved. It takes persistence and patience and repeated action over time. And so the more you get involved, donate, and volunteer with different advocacy organizations that are working on this, the more you're going to have that sustained momentum over time. And this is not just a pitch for the Denver Streets Partnership. We'd love it if you got involved with us, but there's also the Denver Bike Lobby. There's a relatively new group called Pedestrian Dignity that's doing some really great work on pedestrian issues, organizing a lot of these walking tours with city council members and other leaders to really illustrate the challenges that pedestrians face. And even more new is Greater Denver Transit, a group that's focusing attention on the need for better transit. And that's the end of my presentation. So I'll stop there and see what questions you all have.
Who has questions? I'm sure you do, or comments or thoughts or ideas. And Jill, thank you so much. There was so much wonderful information here. Very helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much. I had a question if you have done any research on any case studies of cities or neighborhoods that have successfully turned it around, where, you know, it was once a freeway and now it's a safe, you know, walkable street.
Yeah, there are definitely cities that have made progress on Vision Zero in terms of actually seeing meaningful reductions in traffic fatalities and serious injuries. More so in Europe than in the US. And some of that is translatable, some of it's not, but a lot of it comes down to street design and prioritizing modes other than driving in the design of the streets. In the US, one of the best examples is Hoboken, New Jersey. Not a big city, but definitely an urban area, as you can imagine. And a lot of what they did was changing the design of their intersections to add those bulb outs that shorten the crossing distance, as adding raised pedestrian crossings, and just doing that fast enough and in a widespread enough manner that it truly started changing travel behavior. And then, like I said, on the bigger streets, the key really is transit, because we're always going to have a lot of people who need to travel down those big streets. It's not like we can just tell people stop going places, but it's so much safer to get people there in a bus rather than each person driving their own car. And there's some great examples, like from the city of Seattle. I believe it's Rainier Avenue was a huge arterial street that was similar to like a Colfax or a Federal. They added bus rapid transit. They reduced the number of general purpose travel lanes, and they saw a dramatic decrease in the number of fatalities happening on that street.
What about streets like MLK and Central Park Boulevard and 56th? Because they're essentially freeways here. Do you think it's more effective to have that automated camera that you were talking about, or the bumps in each center intersection?
Yeah, on those bigger streets, automated enforcement definitely can be a very helpful tool. And those are also streets where it would be difficult under current state law to use automated enforcement on those types of streets. So that's where the change in state law would be beneficial. And again, on those streets, because they are so big, just adding bulb outs, they're helpful, but they're marginal in impact. Really, what you need to do is be reallocating space away from cars and repurposing that space for, like on MLK, there's the painted bike lane, but who's going to use a painted bike lane right next to 40-mile-per-hour traffic, right? But if you can actually narrow the lanes or even eliminate a lane and replace it with a fully protected bike lane with a physical barrier between the bike lane and the cars, it's that kind of fundamental transformation of the street that's truly going to make it safe. Unfortunately, in the case of 56th Avenue, the proposals that are on the table are actually to go in the opposite direction, to widen it and add more vehicular capacity. And then they're putting some Christmas ornaments on that with some nicer sidewalks on the side. But ultimately, by widening the vehicular capacity, it's working against making it safer.
Wow, that's surprising to hear.
I have a couple of questions. One, is anyone in your group, or do you know of anybody who's working on getting more bike racks installed? I feel like, as people buy electric bikes and so on, we need good places to park.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's
my
a
first
few
question.
different programs that are addressing that. Right now in commercial areas, business owners can request from the city to have bike racks put for free in front of their businesses. So a simple thing you can do is, as somebody who patronizes those business, you could say, hey, I like to bike here, but it's really hard to find a place to park. Could you request from the city a free bike rack? Because a lot of business owners either don't know that service is available from the city, or they don't know that their customers bike there, and they just assume everybody drives. The city is also in the process of developing a curbside management plan, where they're rethinking how we're using the space adjacent to the curb, both below the curb in the street. So this is, again, an example where daylighting is something you could take away a parking space for a car, but you could put in bike racks instead in that space, and also above the curb. And then finally, the CASR, the community, Climate Action, Sustainability, Resiliency, whatever, the city agency that's responsible for the e-bike rebate program, is definitely recognizing that bike storage is something that's preventing some people from taking advantage of those e-bikes. And in that case, sometimes what people need is not just a rack, right, but something more substantial given the higher value of those electric bikes. And so I know they're starting to look at like actual little mini sheds that could be installed in the public right of way that people could have, key access to if they live in the neighborhood, for that more secure storage.
So the other question I had is, what are good strategies in areas where Denver is coming in contact with another city. So like Denver, Aurora, Denver, Littleton, or whatever it is, where the traffic problem is kind of created on both sides.
Yeah, those can be challenging because each city can be like, well, that's not my problem, that's the other city's problem. And that's where it can be helpful to make friends in the adjacent jurisdiction. Stanley Marketplace is right across the border from you all in Aurora. If you are going to businesses there, it could be good for you to be talking to those businesses or other patrons and see if you can get some allies on both sides of the border and coordinate the messaging that you're sending. So you're making the exact same ask to both Aurora and Denver and letting them know that you're doing that. And sometimes that can kind of shame them into coming to the table instead of pointing at each other.
Other questions,
Yeah, I
thoughts?
just wanted to comment. I mean, I appreciate all your suggestions, Jill. One of the frustrations we've had is butting up against the city. And I understand and I support the idea of prioritizing the high injury network and the others, but then it's like they're going to be playing catch up forever. I mean, we have so many areas in Central Park that we look at and we think, well, this is a fairly new neighborhood and they're just doing the same old, same old. And 56 is an example. So I don't know what I'm asking, but it's like, how do you deal when you're not in the high injury network, probably because we don't have enough data yet. And then they just keep doing the same stuff and we're going to end up being high injury. So I don't know
Yeah,
if you
there's
have any
definitely,
ideas.
there's at least two components to that challenge. One is project delivery and how fast the city's building the things that they already have funding for. And they're really struggling right now. And I think part of it is a lack of leadership from the city and prioritization of this as an important issue. And so I think with the new election, there is a real opportunity. And again, I think it's critical for you to be making contact with your new city council representatives as quickly as possible and letting them know this is a priority for you. And then the other half of it is funding. The reason the city has to prioritize and has to decide which neighborhoods get things and which are put in the waiting line is because there's not enough money to go around. And so also conveying to your leaders that this is something you would support is additional revenue sources. This is where it gets sticky because money doesn't grow on trees, right? So where are we willing to get that money from? Is it, like a parking benefits district where you all have to pay for the privilege of getting a tag that allows you to park on the street in your neighborhood, but that money goes into a fund that can pay for improvements in the neighborhood. And just being willing to engage in that dialogue with your leaders could go a long way.
Anything else? Well, in addition to, I'm sure all of you have voted today, but we have till 7 o'clock tonight. And I think we have a great opportunity with new elections to put on pressure, heat, whatever is needed. And I don't know everybody who is on this Zoom, but I do know a few people, and I'm guessing that the rest of you that I don't know are all tied up with other organizations. And I mean tied up in a good way, tied to neighbors and other groups and that sort of thing. And you are activists. And so, Jill, you should know that about at least some of the people here, that we talk and we act. And we're getting much more into the talking phase or the acting phase than the talking phase, because we feel, a lot of us, like we've talked enough, but we need to move into actions. And so a lot of what you've done here is very helpful. But I do know that, I'm just guessing that everybody on this call is tied to other organizations, and you chat and you do, and you spread the word. And so I think, I wanted to know, how did everybody get onto this meeting? Was it through Amy's email or the CPUN website? Or okay, good. So we all know one another. That's a good thing. Anything else before we stop? Jill, you've been just wonderful. We appreciate you so very much.
Well, thanks again for having me, and feel free to reach out if you want to follow up on any of the information that I shared.
We know where to
today.
find you, Jill, and we will.
You do. All right.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Take care.